Supreme Military Commander Vok'thar of the Galactic Coalition had conquered 11 worlds. He had witnessed the fall of the Cressian Empire, had personally led the assault on the burning nebula, and had stood victorious over enemies that most species considered invincible. His carapace bore the scars of 100 battles, and his tactical brilliance was studied in military academies across 30 star systems.
Nothing in his 4 centuries of warfare had prepared him for what he was about to witness. The observation station hung in geosynchronous orbit above Earth's northern hemisphere, cloaked behind layers of stealth technology that made it invisible to human detection systems. Around the circular viewing chamber, 17 generals representing the Coalition's most powerful member species had gathered at the request of the High Council.
General Krikstall of the Vornathi Dominion clicked his mandibles dismissively. Is this truly necessary? We've reviewed their technology. Chemical propulsion, primitive kinetic weapons, fission-based energy systems. They're barely capable of reaching their own satellite. His compound eyes glittered with contempt. They pose no threat to the Coalition.
The Council disagrees, Matraxis replied. The humans have certain anomalies in their development that warrant closer examination. Their homeworld's environmental conditions, their evolutionary history, their social structures, all deviate significantly from galactic norms. Anomalies? Supreme Commander Vok'thar leaned forward, his interest piqued. What kind of anomalies? That is what we are here to discover. Matraxis gestured toward the viewing screens that dominated one wall of the chamber. We have deployed observation drones to multiple locations on the human homeworld. Today, we will be observing what the humans call military training. According to our intelligence, this facility, the screen flickered to life, showing an aerial view of a sprawling complex in a mountainous region, is one of their most demanding training programs. They call it Special Forces Selection.
General Thesia of the Valanthi Consortium made a sound of polite disinterest. Her species was known throughout the galaxy for their warriors, genetically enhanced, cybernetically augmented soldiers who were considered the finest fighting force in Coalition space. I'm sure their demanding training will be quite quaint. Shall we proceed?
Vok'thar settled into his observation seat, expecting to spend a few hours watching primitives fumble through basic exercises. By the time the observation ended, he would have drafted a recommendation to deny humanity's application immediately, not because they were too weak to contribute, but because they were too dangerous to be allowed into civilized space.
But that was still hours away. For now, he simply watched as the screens flickered to life, showing a group of humans gathered in the pre-dawn darkness.
The humans didn't look impressive, not at first.
They were soft-bodied creatures, lacking any natural armor or weapons. No claws, no venomous spines, no hardened carapace. They stood on 2 legs, inherently unstable, in Vok'thar's professional opinion, and their bodies seemed designed for neither speed nor strength. By the standards of galactic evolution, they were thoroughly unremarkable.
These are their elite candidates? General Krikstall asked, his mandibles clicking with amusement. They look like prey animals.
On the screen, a human in a different uniform, a drill instructor, according to the translation matrix, was addressing the assembled candidates. The drone's audio pickups captured his words perfectly.
Listen up. For the next 21 days, you will be tested beyond anything you have ever experienced. You will be pushed to the absolute limits of human endurance, and then we will push you further. 70% of you will quit. Some of you will be injured. A few of you might die.
Vok'thar's attention sharpened. Die? In training?
Your only obligation is to complete each task to the best of your ability. If at any time you wish to quit, simply ring the bell 3 times and you will be removed from the program. There is no shame in recognizing your limits.
No shame in quitting? General Thesia scoffed. What kind of military philosophy is this? Among the Valanthi, failure to complete training is punishable by execution.
Perhaps their training is so benign that quitting is considered acceptable, Krikstall suggested. Matraxis made a note on her data tablet. Let us observe before we judge.
The drill instructor continued. Today begins Hell Week. For the next 5 days, you will sleep no more than 4 hours total. You will carry boats on your heads, logs on your shoulders, and teammates on your backs. You will run through sand until your legs give out, and then you will run some more. You will enter water so cold it will try to kill you, and you will stay there until I say otherwise.
Vok'thar felt a flicker of confusion. 5 days with only 4 hours of sleep? That couldn't be right. Even the most hardened Korvathi shock troops required regular rest cycles. Without sleep, cognitive function deteriorated. Hallucinations set in. Eventually, the brain simply shut down.
Is the translation matrix functioning correctly? He asked.
Matraxis checked her equipment. Perfectly, Supreme Commander. The human said 4 hours of sleep over 5 days.
That's impossible. No biological organism could maintain combat effectiveness under such conditions.
Perhaps he is exaggerating for motivational purposes, suggested General Xanthus of the Pellucid Collective, a common practice among primitive militaries. On the screen, the candidates had begun running, not toward a destination, simply running, in formation, through the darkness. The drill instructors ran alongside them, shouting encouragement and abuse in equal measure. The generals watched with mild interest as the sun rose and the running continued. 1 hour, 2 hours, 3.
How far have they traveled? Vok'thar asked.
Matraxis consulted the drone telemetry. Approximately 42 kilometers, Supreme Commander.
Crystal made a dismissive sound. A Vornathi warrior could cover that distance in half the time.
The humans are not finished, General.
They were not. Hour 4, hour 5, hour 6. The candidates kept running, their pace barely slowing despite the rising heat of the day. Some of them had begun to struggle, their movements becoming labored, their breathing ragged, but they kept moving.
50 kilometers, Matraxis reported. 55, 60.
By the 7th hour, several candidates had fallen out, collapsing on the side of the road. Medical personnel rushed to attend them, but the majority continued, their faces twisted with pain, but their legs still churning.
How is this possible? General Thessia asked, her voice losing some of its earlier contempt. Our reconnaissance indicated that humans are not adapted for sustained locomotion. Their bipedal gait is inefficient. Their respiratory system is primitive. They should have collapsed hours ago.
Perhaps they have, Xanthus suggested. Perhaps they are running on some kind of stimulant. Matraxis shook her head. Our medical scanners detect no performance-enhancing substances. This is their natural capability. The running finally stopped after 8 hours, 73 kilometers. The surviving candidates were given exactly 15 minutes to rest, eat, and hydrate. Then the instructors ordered them to pick up logs, massive wooden cylinders that required 6 humans to lift, and begin carrying them across the beach.
Vok'thar watched in growing unease. There was something wrong here, something his centuries of military experience couldn't quite identify. The humans were clearly suffering. Their faces showed pain, exhaustion, desperation, and yet they didn't stop. They didn't give up. Even as the hours stretched on and the sun climbed higher and their bodies began to fail, they kept going.
I don't understand, he said quietly, almost to himself. Why don't they quit?
None of the other generals had an answer. Day 2 of Hell Week brought the humans to the ocean.
The observation drones repositioned to capture the scene. 100 candidates standing at the water's edge in the pre-dawn darkness, the Pacific Ocean stretching before them like a black void. The temperature, according to the environmental sensors, was approximately 15 degrees Celsius.
They're going to enter the water, Matraxis reported, a note of surprise in her voice. For what purpose? Vok'thar asked.
Unknown. The instructors are ordering them to lie down in the surf zone.
The humans obeyed. One by one, they laid down in the shallow water where the waves broke, allowing the ocean to wash over them repeatedly. The water temperature, the drones reported, was 12 degrees Celsius.
General Thessia made a sound of disbelief. Their core body temperature will drop rapidly at that temperature. Hypothermia will set in within minutes. On screen, the humans were shivering violently, their body's automatic response to the cold. The instructors walked among them, watching carefully but making no move to remove them from the water. Their core temperatures are dropping, Matraxis reported, her voice strained. Several candidates are showing early signs of hypothermia. Their bodies are beginning to lose the ability to generate heat.
This is insane, Crixtal muttered. They're going to kill their own soldiers.
1 hour. The shivering had become convulsive. Some of the candidates had begun to lose coordination, their movements becoming jerky and uncontrolled. A few had started to show signs of confusion, the cognitive impairment that preceded severe hypothermia.
And then the instructors ordered them to link arms.
The humans obeyed, forming a long chain of bodies in the freezing surf. They pressed together, sharing what little warmth remained in their failing bodies. The instructors watched.
"What is the purpose of this?" Vok'thar demanded. "What tactical value does freezing soldiers have?"
Matraxis was quiet for a long moment, consulting her data. "Supreme Commander, I believe I understand. The instructors are not testing physical endurance. They're testing something else."
What?
The ability to endure suffering, to continue functioning when the body is screaming to stop, to choose pain over failure. She paused. They're testing the human will.
On screen, one of the candidates broke. He stumbled to his feet, staggered out of the water, and collapsed on the beach. The instructors offered him a blanket and a hot drink, and then they led him to a brass bell that stood at the edge of the training area. 3 rings, and he was done. His war was over.
But the others remained, 97 humans, still lying in water that was slowly killing them, still refusing to quit.
After 90 minutes, the instructors finally ordered them out of the water. The candidates emerged like walking corpses, pale, shaking, barely able to stand. Medical personnel rushed to check their vital signs. And then, before they had even fully recovered, the instructors ordered them to begin carrying the boats again. The generals watched in stunned silence as the humans obeyed. These creatures, who should have been hospitalized, who should have been dead, picked up boats that weighed more than they did and began running across the sand.
How? Thessia whispered. How are they still moving?
Vok'thar had no answer. He was beginning to realize that he had fundamentally misunderstood something about these creatures, something important. Day 3 brought a new horror. The candidates had been awake for over 60 hours now. They had run more than 200 kilometers, carried thousands of kilograms of weight, been frozen in the ocean until their bodies began to shut down. By every medical standard the Coalition recognized, they should have been non-functional.
Instead, they were crawling through sand.
The instructors had ordered them to low crawl across a stretch of beach approximately 500 meters long. The catch? They had to do it while instructors sprayed them with freezing water and set off explosive charges around them.
This is simulating combat conditions, Matraxis explained, though her voice had lost its clinical detachment. The water represents enemy fire. The explosions represent artillery.
No warrior can function under these conditions, General Crixtal protested. Sleep deprivation alone would render them combat ineffective. Add physical exhaustion, hypothermia, and psychological stress, it's impossible. On screen, a human named Sergeant Marcus Cole was leading his boat crew across the sand. His eyes were bloodshot, his movements robotic, his face blank with exhaustion. But he kept moving, kept crawling, kept driving his team forward. Instructor reports indicate that this particular candidate has a broken rib, Matraxis said, checking her data. He suffered the injury on day 1 but refused medical evacuation.
He's continuing with a broken rib? Thessia asked incredulously.
The medical officers are monitoring him. As long as the rib hasn't punctured any vital organs, he is allowed to continue.
Allowed? He should be demanding to stop. But Sergeant Cole didn't stop. None of them stopped. They kept crawling, kept moving, kept refusing to ring the bell even as their bodies fell apart around them.
I need to understand something, Vorthakin said slowly. These humans, they are volunteers? They choose to undergo this torture?
Yes, Supreme Commander.
And they can quit at any time? Simply ring a bell, and the suffering ends?
That is correct.
Then why do they continue?
Matraxis was silent for a long moment. Finally, she said, I believe, Supreme Commander, that this is what humans call determination. They have set a goal for themselves to complete this training, and they will accept almost any cost to achieve it.
There are limits to willpower. Every species has them.
I am no longer certain that is true for humans.
On screen, Sergeant Cole had reached the end of the low crawl. He stood up, slowly, painfully, and immediately reached down to help a struggling teammate to his feet. The two of them stood together, supporting each other, as the rest of their boat crew finished the evolution.
And then the instructors ordered them to pick up the boats and start running again.
Day 4. The generals had been watching for over 70 hours now, taking shifts to rest while maintaining continuous observation. None of them had expected the observation to take this long. None of them had expected to see what they were seeing.
The humans were still going. More than half the original class had quit, ringing the bell, accepting the blankets and hot coffee, walking away from the suffering. But 43 candidates remained. 43 humans who had been awake for nearly 100 hours, who had been pushed past every physical and psychological limit the Coalition considered possible, who should have died a dozen times over.
And they were still going.
Log PT, the lead instructor announced. Grab your logs.
The candidates moved with the mechanical precision of automatons. They were beyond exhaustion now, beyond pain, beyond anything the generals had words for. Their eyes were empty. Their movements were robotic, but they obeyed.
Each boat crew lifted a log, a massive wooden cylinder weighing approximately 150 kilograms, and began the exercise. They lifted it over their heads. They lowered it to their chests. They held it extended while the instructors counted. They pressed it overhead again.
Their muscle tissue is breaking down, Matraxis reported, her voice hollow. Multiple candidates are showing signs of rhabdomyolysis, the destruction of muscle fibers. Some of them are urinating blood.
And they're still exercising?
They're still exercising. General Thessia stood abruptly, her elegant form trembling with something that might have been fear. This is barbaric. This isn't military training. It's torture. What kind of species does this to its own kind?
A species that wins wars, Vorthakin said quietly.
Everyone turned to look at him.
Think about it, he continued. Every species in the Coalition trains its soldiers to be effective in combat. We teach them tactics, marksmanship, unit cohesion. We condition their bodies to fight. But we never test their limits like this. We never deliberately break them down to see what remains.
Because such treatment would be counterproductive, Thessia protested. You cannot build effective soldiers by destroying them.
Can't you? Vorthakin gestured toward the screen, where the humans were still lifting their logs, still pressing through pain that would have killed most species. Look at them. They are broken, physically, mentally, emotionally shattered, and yet they continue. They have found something beyond the breaking point, something that allows them to function when all logic says they should have failed.
What are you saying?
I'm saying that the humans aren't training soldiers. They're selecting for something else, something we don't have a word for. He paused. Something that terrifies me.
The chamber fell silent. On screen, the log PT continued.
It was the middle of the night on day 4 when the instructors gathered the remaining candidates around a fire.
41 humans left. They sat in the sand, wrapped in blankets, shivering despite the flames. Their faces were hollow, their eyes vacant. They looked like refugees from a disaster, broken, traumatized, barely clinging to consciousness. The lead instructor, a grizzled human named Master Chief Thompson, stood before them.
"You've been awake for 96 hours, he said. "You've carried boats and logs across more sand than any human should ever see. You've been frozen in the ocean until your heart's almost stopped. You've been pushed harder than you ever thought possible."
He paused, looking at each candidate in turn.
And you're still here.
Something changed in the candidates' faces. A flicker of pride, a spark of defiance. Even in their broken state, they recognized what they had accomplished. In a few hours, Hell Week will be over. Those of you who make it will have proven something. Not to us, but to yourselves. You'll know for the rest of your lives that when things got hard, you didn't quit. You didn't ring the bell. You kept going when every fiber of your being was screaming to stop.
Master Chief Thompson looked toward the bell that stood at the edge of the training area.
But right now, I want you to think about that bell. It's right there. 3 rings, and all of this is over. Warm bed, hot food, no more pain. The guys who quit are already back in the barracks, sleeping off the worst experience of their lives. They're fine. They're going to be fine.
He let the words hang in the air.
So why don't you quit? You've proven you're tough. You've proven you can take punishment. Nobody would blame you for walking away now. You've already done more than most humans ever will. The candidates looked at each other. Some of them were crying, tears streaming down their salt-crusted faces. Some of them were laughing, the hysterical laughter of the broken and the desperate.
None of them moved toward the bell.
"That's what I thought," Master Chief Thompson said, and there was something in his voice that sounded almost like love. "Get some rest. We'll wake you in 2 hours for surf torture."
The candidates collapsed where they sat, falling asleep instantly despite the cold and the discomfort. The instructors moved among them, checking their vital signs, adjusting their blankets, ensuring that none of them were in immediate medical danger. In the observation chamber, Vok'thar watched this scene with growing unease. There was something happening here that he didn't understand, something that transcended military training. The instructors had just offered these candidates a way out, had practically begged them to take it, and not one of them had moved.
Why? He asked aloud. Why didn't any of them quit?
Matraxis had been consulting her cultural database for hours, trying to understand what they were witnessing. "I believe, Supreme Commander, that the humans have a concept they call honor. It is related to social standing, but it is more than that. It is an internal standard, a belief about who they are and what they are capable of. To quit would be to betray that belief."
Every species has honor, perhaps, but human honor appears to be different. It is not based on external recognition or social approval. It is personal, internal. A human can be alone with no one watching and still refuse to quit, because quitting would mean becoming someone they do not wish to be.
Vok'thar considered this. "You're saying they continue suffering not because they fear punishment or desire reward, but because of how they see themselves."
Yes, Supreme Commander.
That is. He searched for the right word. Terrifying.
Hell Week ended on a Friday morning.
37 candidates remained. 37 humans who had been awake for more than 130 hours, who had covered over 300 kilometers on foot, who had been frozen, starved, and brutalized beyond anything the Coalition generals had ever witnessed.
They stood in formation on the beach as Master Chief Thompson addressed them for the final time.
Congratulations, you survived Hell Week. You have earned the right to continue training.
In the observation chamber, General Krikstal made a sound of disbelief. Continue training? What more could they possibly do to them?
Hell Week is only the first phase, Matraxis reported. According to our intelligence, the complete training program lasts approximately 18 months. Hell Week is considered a preliminary screening to eliminate candidates who lack the necessary psychological resilience.
Preliminary? Thessia's voice was faint. What we just witnessed? 5 days of torture?
was preliminary?
The subsequent training phases include advanced combat tactics, specialized weapons training, parachute operations, underwater demolition, and extended survival exercises in various hostile environments.
Vok'thar said nothing. He was watching the surviving candidates, the 37 humans who had proven themselves capable of enduring the unendurable. They were smiling, despite their exhaustion, despite their injuries, despite everything they had suffered. They were smiling and embracing each other.
They were proud, not broken, proud. Shift the observation to a different training facility, he ordered.
Supreme Commander?
I want to see more. I want to see what other training these humans undergo. Metraxis hesitated. There are numerous military training programs across the human world. Which would you like to observe?
All of them.
The observation drones repositioned to a mountainous region in the southeastern part of the human nation called the United States. This facility, according to Coalition intelligence, trained soldiers in a program called Ranger School.
This program focuses on small unit tactics in extreme environments, Metraxis explained. The candidates will operate in swamp, mountain, and desert terrain over a period of approximately 62 days.
Sleep deprivation? Vok'thar asked. Limited to approximately 4 hours per night.
Food?
Approximately 1 meal per day. The candidates are expected to lose 20 to 30% of their body weight during the program.
The generals watched as a new class of candidates began their training. Like the previous group, they seemed unremarkable at first, soft-bodied bipeds with no natural weapons or armor. But the generals had learned to look beyond the surface.
The first phase took place in the mountains. The candidates carried packs weighing over 30 kilograms through steep, rocky terrain, navigating by map and compass, while their instructors evaluated their leadership and tactical decision-making.
They're not just testing physical endurance, Vok'thar observed. They're testing cognitive function under stress.
Correct, Supreme Commander. The training is designed to evaluate the candidates' ability to think clearly when their bodies are failing.
Day after day, the candidates pushed through the mountains. They conducted ambushes in the middle of the night, planned attacks on simulated enemy positions, led their squads through terrain that would have challenged a mountain goat. They did all of this on 4 hours of sleep and 1 meal per day.
And then came the swamp phase. What is that environment? General Crickstal asked, staring at the screen in disgust. The terrain was a mixture of water, mud, and dense vegetation, a primordial soup of decaying organic matter and stagnant pools.
Humans call it a swamp, Metraxis replied. It is characterized by high humidity, abundant insect life, and numerous hazards including venomous reptiles and parasitic organisms.
And they're going to train in that?
For 17 days. The candidates entered the swamp and didn't emerge for over 2 weeks. They waded through chest-deep water, slept in the mud, and conducted combat operations while being eaten alive by insects. Several candidates developed infections from the contaminated water. Others suffered bites from venomous snakes.
None of them quit.
I don't understand, Thessia said, her voice hollow. Our soldiers train in controlled environments. We optimize conditions for learning. We would never deliberately expose our warriors to disease and poison.
Perhaps that is why human soldiers are different, Vok'thar replied.
The final phase took place in the desert, an environment of extreme heat, scarce water, and relentless sun. The candidates continued their tactical training, conducting operations in temperatures that would have killed most galactic species in hours.
At the end of 62 days, the surviving candidates received a small piece of metal to pin on their uniforms. They had lost, on average, 15 kilograms of body weight. They had slept less than 200 hours total. They had been starved, frozen, boiled, poisoned, and exhausted beyond any reasonable measure.
And they were proud, just like the others.
Supreme Commander, you should see this.
Metraxis had directed the observation drones to a new location, an airfield where human soldiers were loading into aircraft.
These soldiers wore specialized equipment, including fabric canopies strapped to their backs.
What are those devices? Crystal asked.
They're called parachutes. They allow humans to jump from aircraft and descend safely to the ground.
Jump from aircraft? Thessia sounded horrified. While the aircraft is in flight?
Yes, General.
The aircraft took off, climbing to an altitude of approximately 400 meters. The rear door opened, and the soldiers began jumping out, one by one, hurling themselves into empty air and trusting a piece of fabric to save their lives.
This is insane, Crystal said. No rational species would deliberately exit a functioning aircraft.
Agreed, said Xanthus. The risk of equipment failure alone makes this tactic impractical.
The human military has determined that the tactical advantages of airborne insertion outweigh the risks, Metraxis reported. Paratroopers can be deployed behind enemy lines, can seize key objectives before ground forces arrive, and can create confusion and disruption in the enemy rear. Vok'thar watched as hundreds of soldiers floated down from the sky, their parachutes blossoming like strange flowers. When they landed, they immediately gathered their equipment and began advancing towards simulated objectives.
They're not just jumping, he observed. They're jumping into combat. They expect to fight immediately upon landing.
Correct, Supreme Commander. Human airborne doctrine emphasizes rapid assembly and aggressive action. Paratroopers are trained to attack regardless of their situation upon landing.
Even if they're outnumbered? Even if their equipment is damaged? Even if they're scattered and disorganized?
Especially then, Supreme Commander. Human military philosophy emphasizes what they call initiative, the ability of individual soldiers to take action without waiting for orders. A paratrooper who lands separated from his unit is expected to assess the situation and take independent action to accomplish the mission.
General Thessia made a sound of disbelief. That's not military discipline, that's chaos.
It may appear chaotic to us, Vok'thar said slowly, but consider the implications. A human military force is not dependent on its command structure. Every individual soldier is capable of independent action. Destroying their leadership does not neutralize their combat effectiveness.
That's not how militaries work.
It's how human militaries work, and that makes them more dangerous than we realized.
The observation drones moved to a coastal facility where human soldiers were undergoing training in underwater operations.
These are combat divers, Metraxis explained. They are trained to operate beneath the surface of bodies of water, conducting reconnaissance, sabotage, and direct action missions.
Underwater combat? Crystal sounded skeptical. Humans are not aquatic. They cannot breathe underwater. They use mechanical devices to supply oxygen. They can remain submerged for extended periods.
The training began with what the instructors called drown-proofing. The candidates had their hands tied behind their backs and their feet bound together, and then they were pushed into deep water.
They're going to drown them? Thessia asked, horrified.
No, the candidates are expected to survive by bouncing off the bottom of the pool and floating to the surface to breathe. They will do this for extended periods. The generals watched in disbelief as the bound humans struggled in the water. They sank to the bottom, pushed off, rose to the surface, gasped for air, and sank again, over and over, for an hour.
"This is torture," Xanthus said quietly. "There is no tactical value in this. They are simply tormenting their own soldiers."
"There is tactical value," Vok'thar replied. "They are teaching their soldiers not to panic. They are conditioning them to remain calm in situations that should provoke terror. A soldier who can think clearly while drowning will be able to think clearly in any situation."
The underwater training continued. The candidates learned to swim for kilometers while carrying heavy equipment. They learned to conduct attacks on ships while remaining completely submerged. They learned to navigate in total darkness, using only compass and current to find their objectives.
And then came the final exercise.
"What are they doing now?" Crystal asked.
The candidates were sitting in a classroom watching an instructor demonstrate something with a piece of equipment. The translation matrix identified the lesson, underwater welding and demolition.
They're learning to work with explosives while underwater, Matraxis reported.
While underwater? With explosives?
Yes, General. These soldiers are trained to approach enemy vessels, attach explosive charges to their hulls, and withdraw before detonation, all while remaining completely submerged.
Thessia put her head in her hands. These creatures are insane. All of them. Completely insane.
Perhaps, Vorthakin agreed, but they are also extraordinarily effective. Consider what we have witnessed. Soldiers who can jump from aircraft into combat. Soldiers who can operate underwater for extended periods. Soldiers who can endure conditions that would kill most species. And all of this is just their training, their preparation for actual warfare.
What are you saying, Supreme Commander?
I'm saying that we have been evaluating humanity's military capability based on their technology, their ships, their weapons, their industrial capacity. He paused, his crystalline eyes fixed on the screen. We should have been evaluating their soldiers.
The observation drones followed a small group of soldiers into a wilderness area. These soldiers carried long-range precision weapons, what humans called rifles, and moved with a careful, deliberate pace that suggested extensive training in stealth.
Sniper training, Matraxis explained. These soldiers specialize in eliminating specific targets at extreme ranges.
What qualifies as extreme range for humans? Crystal asked.
Current human records indicate confirmed kills at distances exceeding 3,500 meters.
The chamber fell silent. That's impossible, Thessia said finally. At that distance, atmospheric conditions would make accurate fire impossible. Wind, humidity, temperature variations, the variables are too numerous to compensate for.
Human snipers are trained to account for all of these variables. They calculate windage, elevation, humidity, temperature, air pressure, and even the rotation of the planet. They can predict where a bullet will land to within centimeters at distances of several kilometers.
But why? Xanthus asked. What tactical purpose does such precision serve?
Leadership decapitation, Vorthakin replied, his voice grim. A single human with a precision weapon can eliminate enemy commanders from a distance that makes detection nearly impossible. And if I understand human tactics correctly, they don't just eliminate one target, they create terror.
Terror?
Consider the psychological impact. You are an enemy commander. You are surrounded by your guards, protected by your defenses, confident in your security. And then the officer standing next to you simply dies. No warning, no attack, just death, arriving from nowhere. And you know that if they can kill him, they can kill you at any moment, from a distance you can't even see.
The generals watched as the sniper candidates practiced their craft. They lay motionless for hours, waiting for the perfect shot. They learned to control their breathing, their heartbeat, their very thoughts. They became part of the landscape, invisible, patient, deadly.
The training for these soldiers takes years, Matraxis reported. They are taught not only marksmanship, but camouflage, stalking, field medicine, and survival in hostile environments. A fully trained human sniper can operate independently for weeks, living off the land while systematically eliminating enemy targets.
One soldier, Vorthakin said quietly. One human soldier, operating alone, can paralyze an entire army with fear.
No one disagreed.
This is a different kind of training facility, Matraxis announced, directing the drones to a building complex that appeared to be some kind of medical center.
They're training healers? Thessia asked. That's hardly unusual. Every species trains medical personnel.
Yes, General, but you may want to observe how humans train theirs.
The scene that unfolded was unlike anything the generals had expected.
The training area was set up to simulate a battlefield, complete with simulated explosions, screaming actors pretending to be wounded, and an atmosphere of complete chaos.
Into this environment, human medical trainees were sent with minimal equipment and impossible time constraints. The scenario, Matraxis explained, simulates a mass casualty event. Multiple wounded personnel, limited resources, active combat ongoing. The trainees must prioritize treatment, stabilize patients, and prepare them for evacuation, all while under simulated enemy fire.
Under fire? Krikstal asked. You mean while being shot at?
In real combat, yes. Human combat medics are expected to treat the wounded while exposed to the same dangers as infantry soldiers. They carry weapons and are trained to fight if necessary.
That's barbaric. Healers should be protected by convention. They should not be combatants.
Human history indicates that they have been attacked while providing medical care. Their response was not to withdraw their healers from combat, it was to arm them.
The training continued. The medics worked with incredible speed, assessing wounds, applying tourniquets, administering medications, all while instructors screamed at them and simulated explosions went off nearby. Some of the wounded were trained to struggle, to scream, to make treatment as difficult as possible.
They're testing their ability to work under psychological pressure, Vok'thar observed.
Correct, Supreme Commander. Human combat medics are expected to make life or death decisions in seconds, often while personally exhausted, injured, or traumatized. The training is designed to prepare them for the worst possible conditions.
And they volunteer for this? They choose to become healers who must fight?
Yes, Supreme Commander. In human culture, combat medics are highly respected. They are seen as embodying both the warrior and the healer, willing to kill to protect their patients, willing to die to save them.
Vok'thar thought about his own military's medical corps. They were trained professionals, certainly. They were skilled at their craft, but they had never been tested like this. They had never been forced to practice their art in conditions of such extreme stress.
What would happen if his medics faced a human military? Would they be able to function? Or would they freeze, overwhelmed by conditions they had never been trained to handle?
He was beginning to realize that the question was not whether humanity could be conquered, but whether anyone should try.
We have been observing for 72 hours, Matraxis reported. In that time, we have witnessed training exercises in 11 different facilities, encompassing infantry, special operations, airborne, maritime, and medical disciplines.
Summarize your findings, Vok'thar ordered.
Matraxis hesitated. Supreme Commander, I'm not certain I can. What we have witnessed defies conventional military analysis. Human training does not merely prepare soldiers for combat, it fundamentally transforms them into something other.
Explain.
The humans have a concept they call breaking. They deliberately push their soldiers past the point of physical and psychological endurance, forcing them to confront their own limits. Most species would consider this counterproductive. It would create traumatized, damaged soldiers. But the humans seem to achieve something different.
The soldiers who survive, Vok'thar said slowly, discover that their limits are not where they thought they were.
Exactly, Supreme Commander. They learn that they can endure more than they believed possible. They develop a kind of confidence that is not based on training or equipment, but on proven experience. They know, because they have experienced it, that they can function when their bodies are failing and their minds are screaming to quit.
General Thesia spoke up, but surely this has diminishing returns. At some point, the training must actually break them.
It does, General. Many candidates fail. Many are injured. Some die. The humans accept these losses as necessary costs. Matraxis pulled up statistical data. The selection rate for most human elite military units is between 10 and 30%. 70 to 90% of candidates fail.
Then how do they maintain adequate force levels?
They have an inexhaustible supply of volunteers. Humans compete for the opportunity to undergo this torture. They see it as a mark of honor, a test of character, a way to prove themselves worthy.
The chamber fell silent. The generals looked at each other. and in their eyes was something none of them had ever expected to see.
"There is one more element of human training we should observe," Matraxis said. "It may be the most significant of all." The drones repositioned to a large indoor facility filled with electronic equipment. Human soldiers wearing specialized gear were moving through simulated environments, virtual battlefields generated by computer systems.
This is combat simulation training, Matraxis explained. The humans have developed technology that allows them to practice warfare without actual casualties.
That seems sensible, Crystal said. Less costly than live exercises.
Yes, General, but that is not why this is significant. Watch closely.
The simulated battles were brutally realistic. The humans moved through virtual buildings, engaging virtual enemies, taking virtual casualties. When a soldier was killed in the simulation, they were removed from the exercise. When they were wounded, they had to be treated by virtual medics.
"They're not just practicing tactics," Vok'thar observed. "They're practicing failure."
Correct, Supreme Commander. Human military doctrine emphasizes what they call after-action review, a process by which every exercise, every battle, every mission is analyzed in detail to identify mistakes and opportunities for improvement.
Every species does this.
Yes, but the humans take it further. They deliberately design exercises where failure is likely, even inevitable. They want their soldiers to experience defeat so that they can learn from it.
On screen, a human squad was being systematically destroyed by a superior force. The soldiers fought desperately, but they were outnumbered and outgunned. One by one, they fell. And then the simulation reset, and they did it again, and again. Each time they modified their tactics, adapted their approach, learned from their mistakes. Each time they lasted a little longer.
"They're not training to win," Vok'thar said quietly. "They're training to lose, and keep fighting anyway."
Yes, Supreme Commander. Human military philosophy accepts that not every battle can be won, but they believe that a soldier who knows how to lose, who can experience defeat and continue to function, is more valuable than one who has never faced failure.
Because in real war, defeat is inevitable at some point.
Exactly. And when that defeat comes, human soldiers are prepared to continue fighting, to retreat, regroup, adapt, and counterattack. They do not expect to win every engagement. They expect to survive, to learn, and to eventually prevail.
Vok'thar thought about the Coalition's military doctrine. It emphasized victory through overwhelming force, superior numbers, superior technology, superior firepower. The idea of deliberately training for defeat had never occurred to their military planners.
But now he understood why the humans were different. They didn't just train to win, they trained to endure, to survive, to refuse to give up no matter what. And that made them more dangerous than any species the Coalition had ever encountered.
The observation had lasted 5 days. The generals had witnessed training exercises that ranged from brutal physical conditioning to sophisticated tactical simulations. They had seen humans push themselves past limits that should have been absolute. They had seen soldiers volunteer for suffering, embrace failure, and refuse to quit even when every rational calculation said they should.
Now they sat in the observation chamber, silent, each lost in their own thoughts.
Finally, Vok'thar spoke.
We came here to assess humanity's military capability. We expected to find a primitive species with inferior technology and negligible combat power. We expected to recommend denial of their Coalition membership application, or perhaps conditional acceptance as a protectorate species.
He paused, looking around the chamber at his fellow generals.
Instead, we have discovered something unprecedented. The humans are not simply a species with soldiers, they are a species of soldiers. Their entire culture appears to be organized around the concepts of struggle, endurance, and defiance. They do not merely train for war, they train for survival against impossible odds.
General Krickstall spoke up. But surely their technology limits their effectiveness.
Our weapons are centuries ahead of theirs. Our ships are faster, more durable, more powerful. In any direct confrontation, we would annihilate them."
"Would we?" Vortigern asked. "Consider what we have learned. Human soldiers can function on minimal sleep, minimal food, in extreme environments. They can operate independently without centralized command. They train specifically to continue fighting after suffering defeat. And they have a cultural tolerance for casualties that would be unthinkable in any coalition species."
What are you saying? I'm saying that we could destroy their cities. We could shatter their fleets. We could kill millions, billions of them. And they would not stop fighting. They would retreat into their mountains, their forests, their underground bunkers. They would wage guerrilla war for generations. They would make any occupation so costly that eventually we would be forced to withdraw.
Thessia shook her head. "You're overestimating them. No species can sustain prolonged resistance against superior technology."
Can't they? The humans have a documented history of exactly that. According to their records, they have fought numerous conflicts where technologically inferior forces prevailed against superior ones through what they call as asymmetric warfare. They have manuals for this. They teach it in their academies. They have been practicing it against each other for millennia.
"Then what do you recommend?" Matraxis asked.
Vortigern was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was heavy with a weight the other generals had never heard from him before.
I recommend that we not only accept humanity's application for coalition membership, I recommend that we do so immediately with full rights and privileges. And I recommend that we begin diplomatic efforts to ensure that humanity remains favorably disposed toward the coalition.
Because you fear their military capability?
Because I fear what would happen if they became our enemy. The humans are not a species we can afford to fight. They are too stubborn, too adaptable, too willing to sacrifice everything for victory. A war against humanity would not end with a peace treaty or a negotiated settlement. It would end only with the complete extinction of one side or the other.
He looked at the screens, which still showed the training facilities where human soldiers were preparing for wars that might never come.
"And I am not confident that the surviving side would be us." The formal report to the Galactic Coalition High Council was unprecedented in its conclusions.
The Military Assessment Committee has completed its evaluation of the human species, Vok'thar announced to the assembled representatives of 47 member worlds. Our findings are significant.
He activated the holographic display, showing clips from the 5 days of observation. The representatives watched in growing disbelief as human soldiers endured conditions that would have killed most species, as they trained for combat in every conceivable environment, as they deliberately pushed themselves past the breaking point and continued functioning.
The humans are not a primitive species, Vok'thar concluded. They are something far more dangerous, a species that has spent its entire evolutionary history fighting for survival. Their homeworld is a death trap of extreme temperatures, natural disasters, and predatory fauna. Their history is an endless series of wars, famines, plagues, and catastrophes. They have survived everything their world could throw at them, and they have emerged stronger for it.
"Surely you exaggerate," said the representative from the Valanthi Consortium. "Every species faces challenges. That does not make them exceptional warriors."
With respect, Representative, look at the evidence. Human soldiers train under conditions that would be considered torture in any coalition society. They volunteer for this training. They compete for the opportunity to suffer. And those who survive are transformed into soldiers who can function without sleep, without food, without hope. They are trained not merely to fight, but to endure, to continue fighting when all logic says they should surrender.
What is your recommendation?
Vok'thar looked at the assembled representatives, the leaders of the most powerful civilizations in the known galaxy. He saw skepticism in some faces, concern in others, but he also saw something else, the beginning of understanding.
My recommendation is that we accept humanity into the coalition as a full member species, not because they are weak and need our protection, but because they are strong and we need their alliance.
And if we refuse? If we deny their application? Then I recommend that we never give them a reason to consider us enemies, because if we do, if we ever threaten their existence or their freedom, they will fight, and they will not stop fighting until one of us is extinct.
He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in.
I have conquered 11 worlds. I have fought the greatest battles in coalition history, and I tell you now, with complete certainty, the humans are the most dangerous species I have ever encountered. Not because of their weapons or their ships or their technology, but because of who they are, what they believe, what they are willing to endure.
They do not fight to win. They fight to survive, and that makes them impossible to defeat.
6 months later, humanity's application for Galactic Coalition membership was approved by unanimous vote.
The ceremony was held in orbit above Earth, a world that the Coalition now recognized as one of the most hostile environments in the known galaxy. The human delegation was led by their Secretary General, a woman named Elena Vasquez, who had the calm, steady gaze of someone who had seen too much and remained standing.
On behalf of the human race, she said, I accept this invitation to join the Galactic Coalition. We look forward to a long and productive relationship with all member species.
Vok'thar, representing the Coalition military, stepped forward to offer the traditional greeting. The Coalition welcomes humanity. We have much to learn from each other.
He meant it sincerely. In the months since the observation, he had begun studying human military history in detail. The more he learned, the more he understood, and the more he feared. The humans had fought wars that lasted for decades. They had suffered casualties in the millions and continued fighting. They had developed weapons of mass destruction, capable of rendering their own planet uninhabitable, and then they had continued developing them, pointing them at each other in a standoff of mutually assured destruction.
They were not a species that could be intimidated. They were not a species that would surrender. They were, as Vok'thar had come to understand, a species that would rather destroy everything than accept defeat. And now they were part of the coalition. Supreme Commander, Secretary General Vasquez said, extending her hand in the human gesture of greeting, I understand you observed some of our military training.
Vok'thar accepted the gesture awkwardly. I did. It was educational.
I hope our methods didn't disturb you too much. We know they can seem extreme to outsiders.
I confess they did. I have never seen any species train its soldiers so rigorously.
Vasquez smiled, a human expression that Vok'thar was still learning to interpret. We have a saying, Supreme Commander, the more you sweat in training, the less you bleed in battle. We've had a lot of practice at war. We've learned that the best way to survive it is to prepare for the worst possible conditions.
And do you expect to fight wars as members of the coalition?
We hope not, but hope is not a strategy. We will continue training as we always have, preparing for the worst, hoping for the best.
She paused, and something in her expression shifted. The smile remained, but there was steel behind it now.
And if anyone ever threatens the coalition, they will learn what we learned long ago. Humans do not give up. We do not surrender. We do not accept defeat. We fight until we win or until there is no one left to fight. There is no middle ground.
Vok'thar looked at her, this small, soft, seemingly fragile creature, and saw something that made his carapace tighten with instinctive wariness. He saw a creditor. I believe, he said carefully, that the coalition is fortunate to have humanity as an ally.
Yes, Vasquez agreed, and her smile showed her teeth. You are.
Epilogue: The First Deployment. 3 years after humanity's admission to the coalition, the Kasari Collective launched an unprovoked invasion of coalition space.
They were a warrior species, confident in their superiority, convinced that the coalition's diverse membership made it weak and indecisive.
They were wrong.
The first human military unit to deploy to a coalition war zone was the 101st Airborne Division, transported to the planet Velaxis 4 to reinforce coalition defenders against overwhelming Kasari numbers.
General Vok'thar, now serving as chief military liaison to the human forces, observed as the humans prepared for their combat drop.
"You understand the situation," he said to the human commander, a woman named General Richardson. "The Kasari hold the capital city. They have fortified their position with heavy weapons. We have attempted 3 assaults and failed each time. Our casualties are significant."
Richardson studied the tactical display. How many Kasari?
Approximately 50,000. They are well supplied and well armed.
And your forces?
20,000 remaining, insufficient for another assault.
Richardson nodded. She turned to her aide. "How many boots are we putting on the ground?"
15,000, General. Full combat load.
15,000? Vok'thar interrupted. Against 50,000 entrenched defenders? That's suicide.
Richardson looked at him, and he saw something in her eyes that reminded him of the training he had observed years ago. That same iron will, that same refusal to accept the impossible.
Supreme Commander, she said, with respect, you don't understand how we fight. We're not going to assault their fortifications head-on. We're going to drop behind them, cut their supply lines, create chaos in their rear, force them to divide their forces and fight on multiple fronts simultaneously.
But the casualties
will be significant. We know. We accept that. She turned back to the display. We've been fighting outnumbered for most of our history. We've learned a few things about it.
12 hours later, the 101st Airborne Division jumped into the night sky above the Velaxis 4. 15,000 humans descending through enemy fire, landing in a city controlled by 50,000 hostile soldiers.
The battle lasted 3 days. At the end of it, the Kasari were shattered. Their supply lines were cut. Their command structure was destroyed. Their fortifications were flanked and overrun.
3,000 humans died in those 3 days. But the capital was liberated. The Kasari were in retreat, and the coalition had won its first major victory of the war.
General Vok'thar found General Richardson after the battle, sitting alone in a ruined building, staring at a list of names on her tablet, the names of the dead.
"How do you do it?" he asked. "How do you send your soldiers to die like that?"
Richardson looked up at him, and he saw that her eyes were wet with tears. She was not a machine, he realized. She was not immune to the cost of war. She felt every death.
"I don't send them to die," she said quietly. "I send them to win. Dying is just something that happens along the way." She paused. They knew the risks. They volunteered anyway, because they believed that some things are worth dying for.
But so many.
Yes, so many. She wiped her eyes, and when she looked at him again, the steel had returned. And tomorrow, we'll send more, because the war isn't over, and we don't stop fighting until it is.
Vok'thar stood in silence, looking at this human general, this soft, fragile, seemingly breakable creature who had just won a battle against impossible odds and was already preparing for the next one.
He had thought he understood humans after watching their training. He had thought he understood their capacity for endurance, for sacrifice, for refusal to surrender.
He had been wrong. He hadn't understood anything.
But he was beginning to.
"General," he said slowly, "I am honored to fight beside your species."
Richardson smiled, a tired, sad, determined smile. "The honor is ours, Supreme Commander. After all, this is what we trained for."
The end.